Hello, Patriots, and welcome again to Patriot Point. And this is a very special time of year for everybody here on the channel because it's Patriots, I think, who watch this the most. Sometimes a liberal watches just to see what Patriots do. I hope you're learning something. But this is a great time for us Patriots because the 4th of July is here. We are celebrating our nation's birth certificate. We're celebrating a holiday brought to us because of Americans with guns. And I really enjoy that. Now, the trouble with America nowadays is that we have so many people from the left who are trying to reteach our history and teach a new generation to hate America and to hate the flag. We'll see on the right, we saw pictures of like President Reagan and President Trump there kissing and hugging the flag. We see on the left kneeling for the flag, refusing to put the hand over the heart for the pledge. We're seeing this in the Olympics now, where the leftists disrespecting the flag, but the people on the right celebrating it. These two things are very, very different. How did the Nazis take over Germany? They divided Germany up, one group against another group. They caused racial divides, and then they show up and say, listen, we got all these groups against each other. How about we just take control and we'll force it to all be calm again? That's exactly what the left is doing nowadays. They're the ones that are saying they're for peace and unity, and yet happen to be the ones that are pushing hate and also violence. Let me point to some of the hypocrisy of the left out right now. Doesn't the left say that the Confederate flag is just the very symbol of racism? Isn't that what they're all the time screaming? Of course it is. Everybody knows that. So really they should be celebrating the American flag, because which flag flew against the Confederate flag in battle? Which one defeated the Confederate flag? It was the good old Glory who did that. So really they should be saying, listen, the flag, this is the anti-racism symbol. It's just like it says in Kentucky's state motto, united we stand. They don't want us to be united. They want us to be divided. It's a way for the leftist, socialist, Marxist to try to take over. So I hope that you will take time this week to celebrate your American pride and the flag. I hope that you'll take time to teach your kids and your grandkids about the importance of respecting the flag. A great way to start is to click on a link I have here in the description. There's an old Johnny Cash song called That Ragged Old Flag. It's great. Take the time to listen to it. Have your kids or grandkids listen and then explain to them why this is so important to us. Because a lot of people are trying to rewrite our history. We don't need to rewrite history. We need to reread history. And that leads us to what I'm going to be talking about this week. This weekend, we're celebrating the Declaration of Independence, our nation's birth certificate. So the question is how well do we know it even as patriots? Well, let's find out with a little game that I like to call Fact or Fiction, the Declaration of Independence. Let's get started with the quiz. We will have 13 trivia questions about the Declaration of Independence, one representing each one of the colonies. Question number 1. George Washington signed the Declaration of Independence. Is this fact or fiction? That is fiction. He never signed it. The reason why is he wasn't with the Continental Congress when they were doing this. He was actually with his troops over in New York defending it from the British, and he didn't get it until July the 9th when he then read it to his troops. Question 2. The Declaration of Independence never mentions the United States. This is actually fact. The Declaration of Independence never mentions the United States properly. It says the word united lowercase and states uppercase, not a proper name as we think of it now. And to give you some reference for this, notice what it says in the Declaration. It says these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. It also says the state of Great Britain. So they were fighting a war to be free from the state of Great Britain, not to be one unified country, but at first they saw themselves as 13 independent states, nation states. And so that is something to keep in mind. It wasn't the federal government that decided to form a bunch of states. It was the states that decided to form a federal government. I just thought I'd throw that in extra. Let's do question number 3. Taxation without representation is in the Declaration of Independence. Is this fact or fiction? This is actually fiction, even though it is often quoted and people think they're quoting the Declaration. They are not. The phrase taxation without representation actually comes from a sermon that was preached in the year 1754 by Pastor Jonathan Mayhew. They used to publish their sermons back in that day. You can see here a copy of it, and it's called an election sermon. And many of the founding fathers got their ideas for the principles of liberty from literally hearing preachers preach the principles in the Bible, such as specifically taxation without representation. Let's do number 4. The Declaration of Independence mentions the separation of church and state. Is this fact or fiction? This is fiction. It is not in there at all. Quite the opposite. Notice what the Declaration actually says. It's talking about your rights. It says nature's God entitles them. It says you are endowed by your Creator with certain unalienable rights. At the end it says that they are appealing to the supreme judge of the world and with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. So repeatedly, twice in the beginning of the Declaration and twice at the end of the Declaration, they are saying we do believe in God, we're calling on God, and there is no separation of church and state in the Declaration. There is a separation of powers in the Constitution to the legislative, executive, and judicial, not a separation of church and state. Number 5, the Declaration of Independence proves America is supposed to be pro-life. Is this fact or is this fiction? If you said it is fact,
you're absolutely correct.
That is correct. The Declaration of Independence proves America is supposed to be pro-life. Notice what it says in the second paragraph, that we are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you see here, it specifically says the right to life. It is listed as the very first right ever guaranteed to every American. Let's do question number 6. The Declaration of Independence says the government is supposed to provide for you. Is that fact or is this fiction? This is a great fiction, and I hope that Andy Beshear and Joe Biden and the rest on the left will actually read this thing. Nowhere in American government does it ever say the government is supposed to provide for you. It is not supposed to be that way. Quite the opposite. The Declaration of Independence lets us know what the role of government is supposed to do. It says to secure these rights, governments are instituted. So why is there government? Is there government to provide for me? No, the government is instituted to secure our rights. That is the proper and limited role of government, to secure rights, not to be a nanny state supposed to being all-seeing, all-providing, all-powerful. Those are attributes for God, and we see those on the left are trying to replace God with government, making that an idol. Well, let's look at question number 7. The Declaration of Independence says that you can overthrow the government. Is this fiction or is this a fact? If you said that's actually a fact,
you're absolutely correct.
That is correct. The Declaration of Independence specifically says that you at any time can overthrow your own government. Notice what it specifically says. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, talking about the rights that they are to protect. It is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. Not only does it say it's your right, later on it goes on to say it is actually your duty to do that. Let's go on to our next question, number 8. The Declaration of Independence condemned slavery. Is this fact or is this fiction? Actually, it does kind of both. In the original draft of the Declaration of Independence, it condemned slavery. Notice what it says in the original draft. It lists several reasons for declaring war against King George and his rule. It says, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery. The original draft of the Declaration of Independence said one of the reasons we are declaring war is because of the slave trade. However, that Jefferson and the other anti-slavery group wasn't able to get that part approved by Congress to be in the final draft. But it was the original intent from day one. Question 9. All 13 colonies voted yes for the Declaration of Independence. Is that fact or fiction? Surprisingly, that is kind of both. All 13 eventually voted yes, but when they actually took the final vote, the state of New York abstained because they had not heard back from their constituents if they wanted to support independence or not. New York, a few days later, changed its abstention to a yes vote. Actually, when they tried to do that a few days earlier and talk about the Declaration of Independence, the states of Pennsylvania and South Carolina voted no. But eventually, when they voted on the final one, they voted yes. New York had abstained, but eventually they changed their answer to yes as well. Let's do question number 10. There is only one Declaration of Independence. Well, should that be obvious? Is that fact or is this fiction? That is complete fiction. There is far more than one Declaration of Independence. They actually printed up more than 20 of them to send with members of Congress to the different states so that they could read that and carry it around to the different towns in their state. So yes, there are anywhere from in the high 20s different copies, original copies of the Declaration of Independence. Question 11. You can buy an original Declaration of Independence. Is this fact or is this fiction? This is actually true. You can actually buy one of the original, signed by the original writers of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. One was sold back in the year 2000 for more than $8.5 million. So some private collectors do have copies of this. There are actually, from what I understand, about 2 or 3 missing copies that were originally printed that have yet to be discovered. So who knows, if they may turn up somewhere, you could be sitting on a fortune and personally own an original copy of the Declaration of Independence. All right, question 12, next to last. One of the writers of the Declaration of Independence didn't even sign it. If you said that's a fact,
You're absolutely correct.
that is correct. One of the people who actually wrote the thing didn't even sign it. And one of the writers was a guy by the name of Robert Livingston. We often credit Thomas Jefferson for writing the Declaration of Independence, and while he was the key writer, the Continental Congress had set up a committee of 5 people to do this, and he was one of those 5 people that worked on the final language before they gave it to Congress to be voted on. And he was a delegate from New York. Well, remember in our earlier question, New York abstained from actually voting for independence. So even though he helped write the thing, he actually never got to sign the declaration that he helped write. Let's do our last question. Number 13. One representative from each of the 13 colonies signed the Declaration of Independence. Is this fact or fiction? Well, the answer is both. There was at least one person from each colony, but some colonies had far more. In fact, the colony that had the least was Rhode Island, and they had 2 representatives sign, and the colony with the most was Pennsylvania, who had 9 of their representatives sign the Declaration of Independence. Fact or fiction? So how did you do on the quiz? May have just realized I didn't know as much about the Declaration of Independence as I assumed that I did. It might be a good time, get online, look it up, read it. You can read the whole thing in less than 15 minutes. I encourage you, get your kids or your grandkids with you as you read that. And we can talk about some of the things that made these people say, listen, these are the principles of liberty. This is what is worth standing up for and risking our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, because they're not going to be taught it anywhere else. And I hope you'll take the time to do that. Which leads me to the last thing this week. A few weeks ago, I was talking about some Kentucky-based companies that are standing up for liberty. And I mentioned the coffee shop Brood. They have been taking Andy Bashir to task, fighting for the liberty of businesses and individuals here in Kentucky, and have been winning. So they said they want to be an official sponsor of the program this week. So if you would like to get some fresh brewed coffee mailed directly to your door, and you know you're getting it not only from a Kentucky company, but from a company that's helping the liberty cause, instead of Starbucks, which is for every leftist, socialist agenda thing that you'd ever want to not support. So let's get it from a Kentucky company that's supporting liberty. I put their website right here in the link of this video, and they said if you will put in the code PATRIOT when you order online, they will give you a 10% discount. Wonderful way to support Kentucky business, liberty, and get yourself some good coffee at a good discount. Well, until next week, I'm Lee Watts for Patriot Point, reminding you that liberty is not a spectator sport.